Friends, if you want to watch a heart-touching and emotional roller coaster, then you're in for a treat because today we're going to talk about the upcoming super hit movie Regretting You, 2025. If you love watching intense family dramas in English, then make sure to like this video. And if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated with all the latest movie talk. In today's video, we'll dive deep into what this movie Regretting You is all about and where you can watch it. I'll be sharing all the fascinating behind-the-scenes details and interesting facts related to the film. Whether you're curious about which OTT platform will stream this movie or wondering if it will air on any satellite channel, I've got all the information ready for you. We'll also take a detailed look at the film's technical team, music department, pre-production journey, filming process, post-production work, its budget, and of course, its box office collection. I'll also share a brief review of the story to give you a feel of its emotional depth and drama. But that's not all. We'll also discuss the star cast, which actor played which character, how the performances turned out, and everything else you should know before watching the movie. So friends, make sure to watch this video till the end, because there's a lot to uncover about this beautiful and powerful film. Let's get started. The story of Regretting You, 2025, kicks off with a false sense of normalcy. Picture a warm, peaceful suburban morning where Morgan is playing the picture-perfect mom role and Clara is the smart, ambitious teenager with her own ideas about life. It all feels familiar, almost too familiar, like the calm before a thunderstorm you don't see coming. That storm hits fast and hard with a tragic car accident that takes the life of Chris, Morgan's husband and Clara's father. But here's where things get complicated. It's not just grief that shakes this family apart. It's the mess of secrets that follow. The movie doesn't stick to a boring straight line. It plays with emotion and memory, layering the present-day grief with flashbacks and hidden pieces of the past that slowly come together like a jigsaw puzzle. At first, Morgan tries to be the strong, responsible parent, but her world begins to crumble when she discovers that Chris had a life she didn't fully know about. She stumbles upon letters, messages, and eventually the biggest gut punch, a clue that suggests he may have been in love with someone else, someone they both knew. Every revelation isn't just a shock to Morgan, it's a hit to her identity, her marriage, and the idea of the life she thought she had. Meanwhile, Clara is spiraling in her own direction. The relationship with her mother, already rocky with teenage rebellion, turns volcanic after the accident. She feels like she's being lied to, controlled, and shut out. And like many teens who are hurting, she pulls away into her own world. But instead of just moping around, Clara starts writing, a novel that becomes her secret outlet. This is where the narrative gets especially clever. As she writes, the story within her story starts to echo the reality she's living. It's almost like watching two movies in one, her fictional characters giving us a coded glimpse into her emotions, her anger, her loss, and her confusion. The major turning points are handled with raw, emotional precision. One big reveal is when Morgan learns who the other woman really was, someone far closer than she could have imagined. That realization doesn't come with a loud explosion, but with a quiet, painful heartbreak that shifts the emotional weight of the film. And Clara has her own breakthrough moment when she accidentally discovers a piece of her father's life that forces her to question everything she believed about love, family, and truth. Their paths are separate but connected, like two parallel tracks heading toward the same destination without either of them knowing it. The mother-daughter conflict sits at the center, like a ticking bomb. They lash out, miscommunicate, and carry their pain like shields, refusing to let the other one in. But the brilliance of the film lies in how it shows healing not as a big, grand moment, but as a series of small gestures, an old letter, a shared memory, a quiet apology. The movie's emotional impact builds slowly, like waves wearing down a wall, until the wall finally breaks. The narrative structure is emotionally nonlinear. It's not a timeline that jumps back and forth wildly, but the feelings do. Grief, betrayal, love, and understanding don't arrive in order. They come in floods, in fragments, in scattered reflections, and that's what makes it so real. By the end, the audience isn't just watching characters work through pain, they're walking alongside them. The film doesn't just tell a story, it pulls you inside one, where time feels like emotion and every beat hits right where it hurts. The characters in Regretting You, 2025, don't just walk through the story. They evolve, break, rebuild, and twist in ways that keep you emotionally invested from beginning to end. At the heart of this tangled emotional drama are two powerful forces: Morgan, the mother who's holding on by a thread, and Clara, the daughter who wants to cut that thread altogether. Their relationship is the engine of the film, and every bit of character development flows from how they pull apart and slowly, painfully find their way back to each other. Morgan starts as the classic mom who seems to have it all under control. She's organized, responsible, and fiercely protective. But as soon as the tragedy strikes, we see that all those layers she wears like armor start to peel off. Her development is a quiet unraveling. She goes from someone who believes in order and doing the right thing to someone who has to sit with chaos, betrayal, and uncertainty. Watching her try to process the discovery that her perfect marriage wasn't so perfect is devastating and deeply human. She doesn't just have to forgive her dead husband. She has to figure out who she is without the image of him that held her world together. Then there's Clara, who is brilliantly written as a teenager, but never reduced to a stereotype. She's fierce, creative, emotional, and sharp, but also vulnerable in a way she tries desperately to hide. Her arc is all about coming to terms with the messiness of adulthood before she's ready for it. The death of her father and the unraveling of her family crash into her at the worst possible moment, just when she's discovering her voice, her independence, and maybe even her first love. What makes Clara's character so engaging is how she weaponizes her pain through her writing. Her fictional world becomes a mirror of her internal war, a place where she can process the truths she's not ready to say out loud. The relationship between Morgan and Clara is where most of the emotional fireworks happen. Their communication breakdown is painfully real: shouting matches, silent dinners, slammed doors. But the film doesn't just use their tension for drama. It builds it up, scene by scene, so when the thaw finally begins, it's genuinely satisfying. They don't heal with one grand gesture, but through subtle shifts. A found letter, an old photo, a shared silence. It's these small moments that stitch their bond back together. Even the supporting characters have weight. Chris, though dead early on, looms large throughout the film. He's not a ghost in the supernatural sense, but in the emotional sense, his secrets force every character to confront uncomfortable truths. Jenny, Morgan's sister, adds complexity as someone who carries her own regrets and choices. The characters surrounding Morgan and Clara aren't just background. They act as emotional echoes and mirrors, amplifying their struggles and guiding their growth. Every character in the film has a motivation that feels believable. No one's arc is forced, and nothing feels like it happens just for plot convenience. People hurt each other, lie, forgive, and change in ways that feel messy and real. The transformation isn't about turning into different people, it's about becoming more honest versions of who they already were. The result is a cast of characters who feel like they exist long after the screen fades to black, fully developed, deeply flawed, and unforgettable. The performances in Regretting You, 2025, are the heartbeat of the film, and the cast doesn't just deliver their lines. They embody the raw, messy, beautiful emotions that make this story hit so hard. At the center of everything is the electric dynamic between the lead actresses playing Morgan and Clara. Their chemistry is so charged that it doesn't feel like acting. It feels like watching two real people live through the worst and most transformative period of their lives. The actress playing Morgan brings a quiet, aching depth to the role. She doesn't need loud outbursts to show you she's in pain. One look, one shaky breath, one moment of silence at the dinner table, and you feel everything. She wears the weight of grief, betrayal, and maternal love all at once, layered like armor she's slowly forced to remove. Watching her unravel after the loss of her husband and the betrayal that follows is heartbreaking, but the beauty is in how she does it without ever slipping into melodrama. Every choice she makes feels lived in and believable, from the way she holds back tears in front of Clara to the way she breaks down alone when no one's watching. And then there's Clara. This performance is a firestorm. The actress gives us all the complicated shades of teenage emotion: anger, confusion, rebellion, heartbreak, and hope, without ever making Clara feel like a cliché. She's bold and headstrong one minute, shattered and lost the next. What makes her performance truly stand out is the way she captures Clara's inner world through small details. A flicker of defiance in her eyes. The way she clutches her notebook like it's her only anchor. The scenes where she writes or reads her own words out loud are packed with so much honesty that it almost feels like the film pauses to let us breathe with her. Together, the two leads create a relationship that is explosive and tender, broken and beautiful. Their fights are brutal because they feel real. Their reconciliations are gentle because they've earned them. You believe every tear, every slammed door, every painful pause, because these two carry the emotional weight of the film like pros. The supporting cast brings their A-game too. The actor who plays Chris doesn't have a ton of screen time, but his presence is felt through flashbacks and memories, and he uses every second on screen to leave a lasting impression. His portrayal is layered with charm and quiet conflict, which makes the later revelations about his character all the more powerful. He manages to be both lovable and flawed, which adds complexity to the emotional fallout. Jenny, Morgan's sister, is another standout. Her performance adds texture and grounding. She's not just there for emotional support. She brings her own regrets and emotional baggage, and the actress plays her with warmth and a touch of bite. Her scenes feel like lifelines, brief but meaningful checkpoints that show just how much these women rely on each other in times of crisis. Even the younger supporting characters, like Clara's friends and love interest, bring dimension and authenticity. They're not just cardboard cutouts designed to push the plot forward. They add color, tension, and softness in just the right doses. This cast doesn't just perform, they bleed, burn, and breathe through their characters. They pull you in and don't let go. Every line feels earned. Every emotion hits where it's supposed to, and every actor, whether lead or supporting, enhances the film's emotional core in a way that sticks with you long after the credits roll. The direction in Regretting You, 2025, feels like a delicate dance between restraint and emotional intensity, and the director handles it with the finesse of someone who understands that the loudest moments don't always need to be the noisiest. Right from the first frame, the tone is set with a quiet intimacy. The film doesn't shout for your attention. It pulls you in gently and lets the emotion simmer until it boils over in all the right places. That's where the director's true skill shines, creating an atmosphere that feels so real and lived in, you forget you're watching a scripted story. The pacing is carefully measured, and that's not an accident. It mirrors the way grief actually feels in real life: slow, heavy, and unpredictable. There's no rush to get to the next twist or emotional breakthrough. The director allows the characters time to sit in their silence, to stew in their anger, to fumble through grief and healing. This gives each emotional beat the space it needs to land with full impact. And somehow, it never feels dull. The drama creeps up on you like an uninvited memory, and that's exactly the point. Stylistically, there's a softness to everything. The lighting is often natural, the colors slightly muted, the camera work intimate but unobtrusive. The director isn't trying to dazzle you with flashy tricks, but instead uses subtle visual cues to deepen the emotional texture of the story. Long takes linger on expressions rather than dialogue. Framing is tight during conflicts, making you feel trapped in the tension. And in moments of loneliness, the characters are often isolated within the frame, surrounded by empty space that mirrors their emotional disconnect. One standout choice is how the film handles Clara's writing. The scenes where she dives into her fictional world don't just feel like cutaways. They're infused with a stylized dreaminess that contrasts the grounded realism of the main story. The director plays with lighting, sound, and even pacing in those scenes, creating a visual language for Clara's inner world. It's a clever and emotional tool that lets the audience feel her growth not just through dialogue, but through cinematic rhythm. The transitions between past and present, reality and memory, are seamless. The director uses visual motifs, like a specific color tone, a recurring object, or a repeated line of dialogue to signal these shifts without needing big title cards or obvious cues. This adds to the film's emotional layering, allowing the audience to slip in and out of memory alongside the characters, without ever feeling disoriented. The mood is consistent and intentional. Even when the story veers into emotionally heavy territory, the director never lets it become melodramatic. There's a grounded weight to every scene, every conversation, every silent stare between Morgan and Clara. And when the breakthroughs finally come, when the walls crack and the truth spills out, the payoff feels earned. The director doesn't manufacture catharsis. They guide it patiently until it happens organically. There's also an elegance in how the director navigates the dual perspective of Morgan and Clara. Neither character is portrayed as the villain or the hero. Both are allowed to be flawed, angry, grieving, and resilient. The direction balances their stories equally, making sure that the audience understands and feels for both without being told who's right. That balance is difficult to achieve, and it's handled masterfully. The overall vision is clear. This is a story about emotional complexity, and the director leans into that fully. They resist the temptation to tie things up in neat, cinematic bows. Instead, the film feels like a window into something deeply personal, and the direction makes sure that window stays wide open. Every decision, from pacing to shot composition to tone, serves the emotional core of the story. It's not just good storytelling, it's emotionally intelligent filmmaking. The cinematography in Regretting You, 2025, works like an emotional compass, guiding the audience not just through the physical world of the characters, but through the emotional weight they carry. It's subtle, it's graceful, and when it wants to hit you, it doesn't hesitate. From the very beginning, the use of natural light and soft framing pulls you into a space that feels both intimate and vulnerable. The camera doesn't just observe, it listens. It leans in when emotions bubble under the surface and steps back when characters need space to breathe, making you feel like you're sitting right there in the room, absorbing the tension with them. Camera angles are chosen with precision and purpose. When Morgan is confronted with the truth about her husband, the camera often looks slightly down at her, capturing her sinking world and crumbling control. But when Clara stands her ground during emotional clashes with her mother, we get slightly upward angles, subtle but effective cues that she's growing, even when she's angry or lost. During their most intense scenes together, the cinematography pulls in close, often framing them in shallow depth of field so the background fades and nothing exists but their pain, their silence, and the distance between them. Lighting is one of the unsung heroes of the film. Daylight scenes are bathed in warm, gentle tones, reflecting the memories of what the family used to be, comfortable, familiar, safe. But after the accident, the light changes. Shadows become longer, colder, and emptier. Rooms feel dim even when lamps are on. There's a visual language to grief here that doesn't need dialogue. You feel the emptiness in the way light slips through half-drawn curtains or how a character stands in the glow of a refrigerator, lost in thought, with only that pale light highlighting their isolation. In the scenes where Clara writes in her notebook, the lighting becomes soft and dreamlike, casting her in an almost ethereal glow that separates her creative mind from the chaos around her. Framing choices throughout the film are deeply intentional. Often, characters are placed at the edge of the frame rather than the center, surrounded by negative space that amplifies their loneliness. During conflict scenes, the camera will position Morgan and Clara in different sides of the room, separated by walls, door frames, or furniture, making their emotional rift visually obvious. And when they start to come back together, those barriers start disappearing from the frame until, finally, they share center space again, not just physically, but emotionally. One of the most visually striking moments comes during a silent dinner scene between Morgan and Clara after a particularly explosive fight. The entire scene is shot in a single wide take, with the two sitting at opposite ends of a long table. No words are spoken, but the camera lingers just long enough on each face to let the silence do the heavy lifting. It's heavy, awkward, uncomfortable, and brilliant. Another standout moment is when Clara stands in her room surrounded by pages from her writing, taped to the walls like wallpaper. The camera slowly spins around her, capturing both her creative power and the emotional chaos bleeding through her art. It's a visual metaphor that doesn't shout but echoes loudly. The cinematography also plays with contrast between past and present. Flashbacks are slightly brighter, colors warmer, and shots more fluid, like memories bathed in soft nostalgia. In contrast, the present-day scenes are cooler, more static, and intentionally composed to feel a bit more claustrophobic. That visual separation helps the viewer immediately register emotional shifts in the story, without needing dialogue or exposition. Throughout the film, the camera becomes a silent storyteller, capturing glances that reveal more than words ever could, letting light dance on faces just long enough to show regret or relief, and using stillness as powerfully as motion. Whether it's a tear glinting in half-shadow or a character framed alone in a crowded hallway, every shot tells a part of the story. It doesn't just look beautiful, it feels like it means something. The editing and pacing in Regretting You, 2025, feel like a heartbeat that syncs with the emotional rhythm of the story, sometimes steady, sometimes racing, and sometimes holding its breath just long enough to make you feel the weight of silence. This isn't a film that rushes to the next scene or cuts away at the first sign of emotion. It lingers, it breathes, and it knows exactly when to tighten and when to let go. That's what makes the flow feel so organic. You're not just watching a sequence of events, you're experiencing the emotional waves of grief, anger, confusion, and eventual healing in real time. The transitions between scenes are subtle, but carefully constructed. When characters move from emotional highs to devastating lows, the editing doesn't jump or jar, it glides. Flashbacks are folded into the present with finesse, often triggered by a visual cue or an emotional beat rather than abrupt fades or heavy-handed filters. One moment Morgan is holding a photograph, and the next, we're in a sunlit memory of a family picnic, no title card, no announcement, just a smooth slide into the past that feels like how memories actually hit us. These transitions not only add emotional depth, but also maintain narrative clarity without slowing the momentum. The pacing, while intentionally measured, never feels sluggish. It takes its time, but purposefully. You're meant to feel the tension during a long pause at the dinner table or sit in the discomfort of a conversation that's going nowhere. These slower beats are designed to match the emotional paralysis the characters are feeling. And then, when the story needs to move, when secrets are uncovered, when fights explode, when a breakthrough happens, the editing tightens up. Cuts come quicker, dialogue flows faster, and the rhythm picks up just enough to mirror the internal shift happening within the characters. One of the most impressive aspects of the editing is how it balances two emotional arcs, Morgan's and Clara's, without ever making one feel secondary. Their journeys are intercut with such balance that even when they're apart physically, their emotional connection, or disconnection, is always present. Scenes are often cross-cut to show parallel emotions, like Morgan confronting a painful truth while Clara pours hers into a fictional story. These mirrored moments create a rhythm that makes the audience feel the tension building between them, even if they're in separate locations. There are a few standout editing choices that elevate the storytelling. In one sequence, Clara is typing furiously in her notebook, and each tap of the pen is matched with quick flashes of earlier scenes, snapshots of moments with her father, her mother, her pain. It feels like her writing is bleeding straight out of memory. The pace accelerates just enough to create urgency, then eases back into calm like an exhale. That's the kind of emotional pacing the film masters, editing that follows feeling rather than formula. Even moments of silence are edited with intention. Scenes aren't trimmed down just for runtime. If a character needs to sit in a room and say nothing for 10 seconds, the editor lets them. That silence becomes part of the story's rhythm. It invites the audience to feel the awkwardness, the grief, the tension, not just see it. The film doesn't cut away from discomfort, it leans into it, and that choice gives the emotional moments more punch. There's also no overuse of quick montages or flashy transitions. Everything is grounded in realism. The scenes are allowed to play out naturally, with cuts that feel invisible because they serve the emotional truth of each moment. When the pacing slows, it feels like time is standing still because the characters are stuck. When it speeds up, It mirrors the sense of urgency or emotional collapse. In the end, the editing acts like the invisible glue that holds the entire narrative together. It never distracts, never overstays, and always supports the emotional current of the story. It's the kind of editing that doesn't just move scenes along, it sculpts the emotional experience beat by beat, giving the audience exactly the right rhythm to feel every moment as deeply as the characters do. The soundtrack and score of Regretting You, 2025, play like an emotional undercurrent that never drowns the story, but carries it with a quiet power. This isn't the kind of music that demands your attention. It whispers, sighs, and occasionally swells at just the right moment to make your chest tighten without you even realizing why. From the very beginning, the music sets a tone of gentle melancholy, using soft piano chords and ambient textures to build a feeling of emotional fragility that mirrors what the characters are going through. The composer clearly understands that this story isn't about spectacle, it's about subtle shifts, buried emotions, and the kind of heartache that creeps in slowly rather than crashing down all at once. One of the most effective tools in the score is restraint. The music knows when to step forward and when to disappear. During moments of intense grief, when Morgan finds that first clue about Chris's betrayal or when Clara breaks down in her room, the score doesn't leap in with dramatic swells. Instead, it hangs back, using faint strings or a solitary piano note, creating space for the characters' emotions to breathe. And in some of the most powerful scenes, it's not the music that moves you, it's the silence. The decision to go completely silent in certain moments is as emotionally charged as any melody. The silence becomes a character itself, filling the room with unspoken pain or unresolved tension, and the absence of music makes you lean in, hold your breath, and feel the weight of the scene that much more. Recurring motifs are sprinkled throughout the score in ways that make the emotional arcs feel connected. There's a soft, almost lullaby-like theme that shows up during flashbacks with Chris, warm, nostalgic, and bittersweet. As the story progresses, that same motif returns, but it's slightly altered, slower, more distant, sometimes played on a different instrument, like a memory that's been tainted by loss and truth. It's these subtle musical callbacks that deepen the emotional resonance, tying the past and present together through sound without needing to explain it out loud. Clara's writing scenes are accompanied by some of the most distinct musical choices in the film. When she escapes into her fictional world, the score becomes slightly more whimsical and airy, with light piano riffs and layered harmonies that capture the creativity and escape she finds in her words. It's a gentle shift, but it signals that we're moving into her inner world, a place of both imagination and deep, unresolved emotion. And when her writing starts to reflect her real life more directly, the music shifts again, blending the real and fictional themes into one cohesive sound that perfectly mirrors her character's emotional evolution. There are also a few standout compositions that don't just support a scene, they elevate it. A slow, aching cello solo during Morgan's breakdown in the kitchen. A distant echo of piano notes during Clara's walk through an empty school hallway after a fight with her mom. A soft acoustic guitar underscoring a rare moment of peace between them. These are the kinds of musical choices that don't scream, but they linger. You might not hum the score later, but you'll remember exactly how it made you feel in the moment. And when the film finally starts to shift from grief to understanding, the music evolves too. Themes that once sounded fragile start to sound fuller, more layered, and richer in tone. It's not a sudden change. It's gradual, like healing itself. By the end of the film, the score carries a sense of resolution, not in a grand, sweeping way, but in a quiet nod that things might finally be okay. The music never becomes overpowering or manipulative. It blends seamlessly with the story, serving as a companion to the characters rather than a spotlight stealer. It enhances every tear, every hesitation, every step toward forgiveness. In a film like this, where emotions do most of the heavy lifting, the soundtrack and score act like a subtle emotional guide, telling you where the pain lies, where the hope flickers, and where the love still lingers, even when the characters can't say it out loud. It's the kind of score that wraps itself around the story like a memory, soft, persistent, and unforgettable. Regretting You, 2025, is a film that wears its heart on its sleeve, but don't let the emotional drama fool you. This story is rich with themes that go far beyond surface-level heartbreak. At its core, the film is a deep exploration of grief, forgiveness, identity, and the messy, complicated love that binds parents and children. It doesn't just scratch the surface of these themes. It dives into them, swirls them around, and lets them collide in ways that are both painfully real and profoundly moving. Grief is the anchor that pulls every character into unfamiliar emotional territory. But what the film does so well is show that grief isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. Morgan's grief is heavy, silent, structured. Clara's grief is chaotic, loud, and defiant. The film doesn't compare their pain. It honors the different ways they carry it. This theme plays out not only in what the characters say, but in how they move through the world. Morgan tries to stay busy and fix things, while Clara rebels against the idea that life can ever be normal again. Through these parallel journeys, the film examines how loss can either tear people apart or slowly bring them back together, if they're willing to look past their assumptions. Another powerful theme is the generational divide, especially between mothers and daughters. This isn't your typical teenage rebellion story. The film digs deeper into how mothers often try to shield their children from pain by hiding the truth, while daughters crave that very truth to feel understood. Morgan wants to protect Clara from the ugliness of the past, but Clara wants to feel trusted enough to face it. This push and pull, between protecting and revealing, between silence and honesty, is one of the film's most emotionally charged dynamics. And it's not just about the fight between them. It's about the universal fear parents have of becoming strangers to their children, and the fear children have of outgrowing the version of their parents they thought they knew. Forgiveness is another key theme, and it doesn't come easily. The film doesn't present forgiveness as a magical fix or a tidy resolution. It shows how hard it is to forgive someone who's gone, someone who left behind questions that may never be answered. Morgan has to forgive Chris, without the luxury of closure. Clara has to forgive her mother, without fully understanding her choices. And perhaps hardest of all, they both have to forgive themselves for how they've hurt each other in the process. The movie treats forgiveness not as a final act, but as a slow, painful journey that requires vulnerability, honesty, and letting go of the need for perfect answers. There's also a beautiful, underlying theme of identity, particularly for Morgan. For years, she's defined herself as a wife and a mother. But after the accident and the truth about Chris begins to unfold, she has to ask, who am I without him? It's not just Clara coming of age in this story, it's Morgan, too. The film shows that reinvention and self-discovery aren't reserved for the young. Sometimes, life forces you to start over, even in your 40s, and that's not a failure, it's a quiet kind of courage. Clara's storyline explores how creativity can be a lifeline. Her writing becomes a way to process grief, to tell the truth she can't say out loud, and to understand herself better. There's a strong message here about how art can transform pain into something powerful. Her fictional world isn't just escapism, it's a mirror, a confession, and eventually, a bridge that helps her reconnect with Morgan. The film also quietly touches on the burden of secrets. Chris's hidden life doesn't just damage his memory, it forces the people he left behind to live with emotional wreckage they didn't see coming. The story suggests that secrets, even when intended to protect, almost always cause more harm than truth ever could. It's a commentary on how honesty, though often painful, is the only foundation strong enough to build lasting relationships. By the end, the film leaves you sitting with big, lingering questions about love, loss, and what we owe each other as family. It doesn't try to preach. It doesn't wrap everything up in a pretty bow. It offers ideas, emotions, and raw human moments that stick with you. The themes aren't delivered with a hammer. They unfold like petals, each one revealing something about the way people hurt, heal, and hold on to each other, even when everything else is falling apart. Regretting You, 2025, may not be a movie that screams CGI spectacle at first glance, but don't underestimate its subtle visual craft. This isn't a story driven by explosions or fantasy realms, yet the visual effects and enhancements it does use are surprisingly thoughtful and absolutely essential in shaping the emotional atmosphere of the film. Rather than relying on loud digital wizardry, it opts for restrained, emotionally resonant touches that serve the narrative without ever overshadowing it. In many scenes, the visual effects are practically invisible, which is exactly what makes them effective. They don't announce themselves with a flash. Instead, they quietly support the mood, tone, and symbolism of the story. A good example comes in moments of flashback or emotional tension, where subtle color grading shifts the temperature of the image. Warmer, nostalgic hues are used in memories of the past, especially scenes featuring Chris before the tragic accident. Then, colder, more desaturated tones dominate the present-day narrative as grief sets in. While this isn't CGI in the traditional blockbuster sense, it's a digital manipulation that significantly impacts the viewer's emotional connection to the story. In Clara's imagination and writing sequences, that's where the film truly dips its toes into more stylized visuals. Her creative inner world is brought to life with a mix of light CGI and dreamlike effects, words appearing on the screen, shifting scenery that mirrors her mental state, and surreal transitions that blur the lines between her reality and the fiction she creates. These moments are where the film gets playful with its digital toolkit, and the result is immersive without ever being overwhelming. It doesn't feel like a visual detour. It feels like an extension of Clara's voice. There are also subtle uses of digital background augmentation. Some scenes set in emotionally loaded locations, a quiet hospital hallway, a stormy backyard, a candlelit memorial, use CGI-enhanced environments to heighten mood. These aren't epic landscapes or grand vistas, but they create atmosphere in a way that practical sets alone might not fully deliver. Whether it's adding a distant rain effect, layering in flickering candlelight for added depth, or digitally adjusting a sky to reflect a character's turmoil, these are the kinds of enhancements that you might not even notice, but you definitely feel. When it comes to practical effects, the film keeps things grounded. Emotional reactions, facial expressions, physical props. All these are done practically and give the story a raw, grounded feeling. There's no artificial gloss placed on tears, no digital smoothing of emotional breakdowns. And that's what gives the performances room to breathe. The combination of light, invisible CGI with solid, real-world interaction ensures that the audience never feels pulled out of the moment. Perhaps one of the most impressive things the visual effects do in Regretting You is create transitions between timelines and emotional states without relying on typical fade-ins or flash cuts. There are beautifully blended sequences where a character walks out of a memory into the present, where the background changes subtly behind them as they move through space. These transitions are seamless and cinematic, reinforcing the idea that memory, grief, and identity are fluid and often tangled. So while there may not be giant monsters or jaw-dropping green screen stunts, the film proves that visual effects don't need to be loud to be powerful. When used with purpose and precision, even the quietest CGI touches can deepen a story's impact, guide the emotional journey, and pull the viewer closer to the characters' inner lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the best effects are the ones you barely notice, because they're doing their job that well. Regretting You, 2025, may not be a movie that screams CGI spectacle at first glance, but don't underestimate its subtle visual craft. This isn't a story driven by explosions or fantasy realms, yet the visual effects and enhancements it does use are surprisingly thoughtful and absolutely essential in shaping the emotional atmosphere of the film. Rather than relying on loud digital wizardry, it opts for restrained, emotionally resonant touches that serve the narrative without ever overshadowing it. In many scenes, the visual effects are practically invisible, which is exactly what makes them effective. They don't announce themselves with a flash. Instead, they quietly support the mood, tone, and symbolism of the story. A good example comes in moments of flashback or emotional tension, where subtle color grading shifts the temperature of the image. Warmer, nostalgic hues are used in memories of the past, especially scenes featuring Chris before the tragic accident. Then, colder, more desaturated tones dominate the present-day narrative as grief sets in. While this isn't CGI in the traditional blockbuster sense, it's a digital manipulation that significantly impacts the viewer's emotional connection to the story. In Clara's imagination and writing sequences, that's where the film truly dips its toes into more stylized visuals. Her creative inner world is brought to life with a mix of light CGI and dreamlike effects, words appearing on the screen, shifting scenery that mirrors her mental state, and surreal transitions that blur the lines between her reality and the fiction she creates. These moments are where the film gets playful with its digital toolkit, and the result is immersive without ever being overwhelming. It doesn't feel like a visual detour. It feels like an extension of Clara's voice. There are also subtle uses of digital background augmentation. Some scenes set in emotionally loaded locations, a quiet hospital hallway, a stormy backyard, a candlelit memorial, use CGI-enhanced environments to heighten mood. These aren't epic landscapes or grand vistas, but they create atmosphere in a way that practical sets alone might not fully deliver. Whether it's adding a distant rain effect, layering in flickering candlelight for added depth, or digitally adjusting a sky to reflect a character's turmoil, these are the kinds of enhancements that you might not even notice, but you definitely feel. When it comes to practical effects, the film keeps things grounded. Emotional reactions, facial expressions, physical props. All these are done practically and give the story a raw, grounded feeling. There's no artificial gloss placed on tears, no digital smoothing of emotional breakdowns. And that's what gives the performances room to breathe. The combination of light, invisible CGI with solid, real-world interaction ensures that the audience never feels pulled out of the moment. Perhaps one of the most impressive things the visual effects do in Regretting You is create transitions between timelines and emotional states without relying on typical fade-ins or flash cuts. There are beautifully blended sequences where a character walks out of a memory into the present, where the background changes subtly behind them as they move through space. These transitions are seamless and cinematic, reinforcing the idea that memory, grief, and identity are fluid and often tangled. So while there may not be giant monsters or jaw-dropping green screen stunts, the film proves that visual effects don't need to be loud to be powerful. When used with purpose and precision, even the quietest CGI touches can deepen a story's impact, guide the emotional journey, and pull the viewer closer to the characters' inner lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the best effects are the ones you barely notice, because they're doing their job that well. The set design and locations in Regretting You, 2025, do more than just serve as a backdrop. They act as emotional companions to the characters, subtly reinforcing the film's themes of grief, healing, identity, and the tangled bond between mother and daughter. Every space, whether it's a cozy kitchen, a silent hospital room, or a windswept porch drenched in nostalgia, is layered with emotional storytelling. These settings don't just look real, they feel lived in, scarred, and quietly aching just like the people who occupy them. The Morgan household, for example, is practically a character in itself. From the framed photos lining the hallway to the soft, worn couch where family arguments and reconciliations take place, it's designed to reflect history and memory. You can almost smell the coffee brewing in the mornings, feel the silence that follows a fight, and sense the absence left by a loved one now gone. The attention to detail here, faded wallpaper, creaking floorboards, cluttered corners, isn't accidental. It immerses the viewer in a world that feels intimate and heartbreakingly authentic. Then there's the school setting where Clara's coming-of-age journey unfolds. It's not the shiny, sanitized high school of so many other films. It's a bit gritty, imperfect, and entirely believable. Lockers are dented, posters are peeling, and classrooms feel both claustrophobic and comforting, depending on Clara's mental state. The drama room in particular becomes a refuge, a place where expression is allowed and where some of the most heartfelt moments of teen vulnerability take place. The contrast between the school and home settings plays into the larger tension between independence and safety, rebellion and structure. One standout location that adds symbolic depth to the story is the small-town bookstore and coffee shop that becomes Clara's escape hatch. It's dimly lit with warm tones, filled with shelves that seem to lean under the weight of unread emotions. This place acts as a bridge between her reality and her aspirations. It's here that her love for writing blooms, where secrets are shared, and where she slowly pieces together the truths that her mother tried to shield her from. The design of this space, intimate, chaotic in a cozy way, mirrors Clara's internal journey. Let's not forget the hospital. Stark white corridors and sterile lighting immediately shift the emotional tone when Morgan's husband Chris is brought in. These scenes are intentionally cold, quiet, and isolating. The location strips away the comfort of home and sets the stage for confrontation with mortality, loss, and truth. Even the waiting room chairs, the beeping monitors, and the drawn blinds are used to amplify emotional discomfort. You're not just watching the characters suffer, you feel the weight of those clinical surroundings pressing down. Outdoor locations are used with a strong sense of emotional timing. Whether it's a rainy day on the front porch as Morgan watches the world move on without her, or Clara riding her bike past familiar landmarks that now feel changed after tragedy, the film uses its settings as emotional cues. Weather becomes a silent narrator. A storm might break at the height of an argument, while sunshine might creep back in as understanding begins to bloom between characters. These elements ground the drama in a tangible, atmospheric reality. Props also pull their weight. Whether it's a journal left behind by Chris that becomes a pivotal narrative device, or a broken picture frame that sparks an emotional breakdown, each object has meaning. The production team clearly approached every item with intention. Nothing feels random or decorative. The props are clues, echoes, remnants of relationships both cherished and fractured. Overall, the production design doesn't shout for attention. It whispers secrets, memories, and emotional truths. Each location feels tailor-made for the characters' arcs, helping the audience step into their shoes and feel the world through their eyes. The settings are never just there to fill the frame. They carry the emotional weight of the story, turning ordinary places into poetic extensions of the characters' hearts. The dialogue in Regretting You, 2025, crackles with emotional honesty, teenage rebellion, parental frustration, and that bittersweet undercurrent of things left unsaid. From the very first conversation between Morgan and Clara, the script sets the tone. It's layered, relatable, and just raw enough to sting. This is not one of those movies where characters speak in polished metaphors or endless exposition. Every line feels like it's been pulled straight from a journal entry, an argument behind closed doors, or a quiet moment of introspection at 3 a.m. The beauty of the dialogue lies in its duality. Morgan's lines are tinged with restraint, a woman trying to maintain control over a life unraveling at the seams. She often speaks with a calm, measured tone that masks a tempest of grief and guilt just beneath the surface. You can feel her trying not to crack, trying to keep it all together for Clara, even when she's hanging by a thread. It's not always what she says, but how she says it. A simple "I'm fine" from her can carry the weight of a breakdown. In contrast, Clara's dialogue is sharp, impulsive, and emotionally volatile. She lashes out, she questions everything, and she doesn't hold back. There's a teenage poetry in her anger, rage steeped in betrayal and confusion. Lines like, "You lied to protect me, but what if I didn't want your protection?" don't just sound good, they hit like a punch to the chest. Her words often come in torrents, reflecting the chaos of her world being flipped upside down. She talks like a young woman who's only just realizing that adults are deeply flawed, and that growing up often means surviving disappointment. The script knows when to push hard, and when to hold back. In the heavier scenes, like when Morgan finally confesses the truth about Chris's past, there's a deliberate hesitation. Pauses linger. Words falter. You can practically hear the silence swallowing up the room before someone dares to break it. These moments are written with the kind of restraint that makes you lean in. It's not about melodrama. It's about the subtle heartbreak in saying something you can never take back. But don't be fooled into thinking the entire script is drenched in drama. There's humor too. Dry, smart, and perfectly timed. Clara's best friend Lexi provides a lot of comic relief without ever feeling like a cliché. Her sarcastic jabs and painfully honest observations add levity to tense moments, making you laugh even while your throat is still tight from the last scene. Lines like, I swear your mom has a built-in lie detector, and the scowl of a medieval nun aren't just funny. They deepen the relationships between characters by showing us how they navigate stress through wit and loyalty. There are standout lines that linger long after the credits roll. One particularly moving exchange happens when Morgan tells Clara, "I didn't know how to be a mother and a person at the same time. So I chose you, even when I lost pieces of myself." It's one of those heart-wrenching truths that cuts both ways. It justifies everything, and yet doesn't excuse anything. That kind of writing doesn't rely on grand speeches. It's simple, devastating, and so very human. The film also makes excellent use of unspoken dialogue. The script trusts its actors to communicate volumes through silence, glances, or a single word dropped like a stone. The screenplay feels written for performance, giving actors the space to breathe life into lines that could have felt flat on paper. Even everyday conversations about chores, boys, school dances are laced with deeper meaning because of what's simmering underneath. Ultimately, the dialogue in Regretting You doesn't just push the plot forward, it builds the world. It maps the emotional terrain of a fractured family trying to find a way back to each other. It gives voice to confusion, love, fear, and regret in a way that feels real, not polished or perfect, but perfectly human. The words may not always be beautiful, but they are believable, and that's what makes them unforgettable. Regretting You, 2025, dives headfirst into the emotional terrain of the family drama genre, but it doesn't just settle for being another tearjerker about grief and mother-daughter conflict. It cleverly stretches its boundaries, pushing the genre into unexpected territory by layering in elements of mystery, coming-of-age tension, romantic entanglements, and even subtle psychological suspense. It's the kind of film that invites you in with familiar tropes, bereavement, adolescent rebellion, strained parental relationships, but then refuses to let you relax into predictability. At first glance, it sets up like a conventional domestic drama. A picture-perfect family shattered by an untimely tragedy. A widowed mother struggling to keep things together. A teenage daughter pulling away in anger and confusion. These ingredients are all tried and true, but Regretting You refuses to coast on genre autopilot. Instead, it takes these expected beats and injects them with urgency and emotional volatility. The result is a film that feels intensely alive, like a melodrama that's too self-aware to fall into melodrama. The film introduces a subtle but captivating mystery thread that sets it apart from traditional family dramas. The discovery of a secret, a hidden affair, and a web of lies that rewrites everything Clara and Morgan thought they knew adds a thriller-like pulse to the narrative. This subplot doesn't transform the film into a full-blown mystery, but it does create an undercurrent of suspense that keeps viewers on edge. Each new revelation forces the characters and the audience to reassess motives, timelines, and relationships. It's a smart, genre-bending tactic that adds freshness without derailing the emotional core of the story. In terms of teenage drama, the film walks a tightrope between authenticity and heightened emotion. It doesn't reduce Clara's storyline to hormonal outbursts or high school gossip. Instead, it honors the gravity of her emotional arc. Her first love, her first heartbreak, and her disillusionment with her parents are treated with the same weight as Morgan's journey through widowhood and betrayal. There's humor in the way these worlds collide, Clara navigating prom drama while Morgan uncovers devastating family secrets, but it never plays as trivial. That balance between adolescent angst and adult devastation is where the film finds a unique rhythm, managing to blend tones without veering into tonal chaos. Humor is used sparingly but precisely. Lexi's presence, in particular, acts as a genre pressure valve, breaking tension with well-timed sarcasm and keeping the film from becoming too emotionally oppressive. This smart infusion of levity makes the dramatic highs hit even harder, because the audience is never allowed to get emotionally numb. The film knows when to breathe, when to scream, and when to whisper. That awareness of emotional pacing is what helps it straddle multiple genres without ever feeling muddled. As for romance, the film flirts with romantic drama but never allows it to become the focus. Morgan's potential second chance at love and Clara's sweet but fractured relationship with Miller provide emotional complexity rather than distraction. These romantic threads function less as genre tropes and more as character catalysts, pushing both mother and daughter to confront what they really want and what they're willing to forgive. One of the more subversive choices is how the film handles closure. Unlike many dramas that tie everything up in a neat emotional bow, Regretting You leans into the messiness. Forgiveness isn't immediate. Trust isn't easily rebuilt. Some questions remain unresolved. It resists the genre's urge for catharsis, choosing instead to reflect the complicated, nonlinear nature of grief, healing, and love. This refusal to simplify or sanitize emotional truth is one of the film's boldest moves and most defining traits. In the end, Regretting You doesn't reinvent the family drama. It refines it. It injects it with enough modern tension, layered storytelling, and genre-fluid twists to make it feel fresh, gripping, and relevant. It respects the conventions just enough to honor them, then breaks them when it matters most. It delivers everything fans of emotional drama could ask for, but it also dares to challenge them, to sit with discomfort, to live in the gray areas, and to accept that sometimes the mess is the message. Regretting You may appear on the surface to be a deeply personal story about grief and fractured relationships, but beneath its emotional drama lies a surprisingly nuanced social and cultural commentary. The film doesn't wave a political banner or force-feed its themes, yet it speaks volumes about the emotional labor of women, the complexities of modern motherhood, and the generational disconnect that seems to define today's family dynamics. It does this not by preaching, but by putting its characters in messy, all-too-real situations that mirror the quiet battles fought in households everywhere. At its core, the film is an exploration of womanhood across two drastically different generations. Morgan, the mother, represents the woman who followed the rules, who got married young, supported her husband, raised a daughter, and built a life based on the promises of security and selflessness. Clara, on the other hand, is the voice of a younger generation that demands autonomy, emotional honesty, and the freedom to define life on her own terms. The tension between the two of them isn't just about personal grief. It's a reflection of a broader cultural clash between outdated expectations and evolving identities. Through Morgan, the film makes a sharp commentary on the emotional toll placed on women in family systems. She's expected to be composed, nurturing, forgiving, and resilient even as her world collapses. No one stops to ask what she needs or how she feels. She's simply expected to carry on. This silent demand mirrors real-world societal pressures placed on women to be emotional anchors, no matter the personal cost. The film doesn't spell it out with dialogue. It shows it in Morgan's quiet breakdowns, her suppressed rage, and her eventual decision to reclaim her voice, even if it means burning the facade of perfection to the ground. Clara's arc becomes a lens for youth disillusionment and rebellion, not just against authority, but against the adult world's hypocrisies. Her generation has grown up in a digital age of transparency and instant access to truth, and the lies she uncovers about her family feel like a betrayal of that principle. Her anger isn't just hormonal, it's existential. She doesn't want to inherit a world of secrets, passive acceptance, and emotional suppression. The film captures this frustration with stunning accuracy, giving Clara's rebellion weight and cultural relevance. It becomes a symbol of generational demands for accountability and truth, even when it's painful. The film also dips into the sensitive territory of infidelity, not merely as a scandalous twist, but as a broader metaphor for emotional neglect and the way people cope with dissatisfaction. It raises questions about loyalty, emotional fulfillment, and how people justify their betrayals. Rather than painting the affair as black and white wrongdoing, the film challenges viewers to consider the layers of unmet needs, broken communication, and suppressed desires that often lead to such choices. It forces audiences to confront the uncomfortable idea that even those we love can deeply disappoint us, and that forgiveness isn't always owed. There's also a quiet but powerful commentary on the role of men in emotional landscapes. Chris, Clara's father, is a well-liked, seemingly perfect man who turns out to be the fulcrum of the family's collapse. His choices trigger the film's central conflict, but he's absent for most of it, just like the emotional presence of many men in stories centered on women. The film doesn't vilify him, but it does underline how often women are left to clean up the emotional wreckage left by male decisions. This silent critique hits hard, especially in a culture where emotional invisibility is still tolerated from men. Even high school culture isn't safe from the film's subtle scalpel. Through Clara's interactions at school, we see the performative nature of teenage life, the curated images on social media, the pressure to conform, the fear of being vulnerable. These aren't just filler subplots. They feed directly into the film's larger themes about authenticity and emotional truth. Clara's eventual detachment from the popularity machine mirrors her deeper disillusionment with adult hypocrisy. Regretting You is also daring in its portrayal of grief, not as a linear process of sadness and recovery, but as a chaotic force that shatters identity, trust, and even love. It calls out the cultural myth that grief should be clean and manageable, and instead shows it as something unpredictable, divisive, and sometimes ugly. In doing so, it pushes back against the sanitized portrayals of loss we often see in mainstream media and validates the messier realities that so many endure in silence. There's no heavy-handed moralizing here. The film allows its characters to be flawed, to contradict themselves, to lash out and pull back. And in doing so, it presents a surprisingly layered social critique, not just of family dysfunction, but of the unspoken roles we're all taught to play, the emotional debts we inherit, and the courage it takes to break generational cycles. That's what makes its commentary so effective. It never tells you what to think. It just shows you the truth, raw and unvarnished, and trusts you'll feel it in your gut. Regretting You knows exactly how to tug on the emotional threads that bind audiences to a story. This isn't the kind of film you watch passively while folding laundry. No, this one pulls you in, wraps itself around your heart, and occasionally stomps on it just to make sure you're paying attention. The emotional beats are carefully timed, often arriving just when you think things might be settling down. That sense of unpredictability, who's going to break down next, what secret's about to be revealed, when will someone finally say what needs to be said, keeps the audience leaning forward, bracing for impact. Whether it's a tearful confrontation or a wordless look packed with meaning, the film knows how to milk every ounce of tension and emotional payoff. One of the strongest ways Regretting You connects with viewers is through its universal themes: grief, betrayal, mother-daughter conflict, and the desperate search for closure. Almost everyone, regardless of age or background, can find a part of themselves reflected in these characters. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager trying to make sense of your world or a parent trying to keep it from falling apart. The rawness of Morgan and Clara's pain is instantly relatable. It hits like a punch to the gut because it's not just about losing someone, it's about losing the version of yourself you were when they were still around. And that kind of grief doesn't fade quietly. It lingers, it echoes, and the film leans into that emotional echo rather than trying to tidy it up for the sake of comfort. But this isn't all tears and heartbreak. The film also delivers moments of levity, tension-cutting humor, and unexpected sweetness, tiny flashes of joy that shine even brighter against the heavy emotional backdrop. There are scenes that bring laughter simply because they feel so authentic. Awkward conversations, frustrated outbursts, or those beautifully awkward attempts at reconnection where no one knows quite what to say. These human touches keep the film from being an emotional slog. They invite viewers to laugh through the tears, to breathe between the breakdowns, and to feel the full spectrum of human emotion rather than just drowning in one shade of sorrow. Then there are the shocking reveals. When the truth about the affair finally lands, it doesn't come with soap opera flair. It comes like a slow-moving train you can't stop, and by the time it hits, it's less about surprise and more about devastation. The kind of reveal that forces audiences to reevaluate everything they've seen. Every flashback, every throwaway line, every tense silence. That's the brilliance of it. It doesn't just deliver a plot twist. It reshapes the emotional terrain of the story, and that ripple effect reaches deep into the audience's investment in the characters. Perhaps one of the most powerful aspects of audience engagement here is the post-viewing impact. This is not a movie you forget once the credits roll. It lingers. It invites discussion not in the "what do you think the ending meant" kind of way, but in the "can we talk about that fight between Morgan and Clara because I've lived that moment" kind of way. It sparks conversations about forgiveness, the weight of secrets, and the way families hurt each other without always meaning to. People leave this film texting their moms, reaching out to their daughters, or simply sitting in silence, thinking about the relationships they've taken for granted or misunderstood. Repeat viewings don't feel obligatory, they feel necessary. Because once you know the full emotional map of the story, you want to go back and trace the lines again, spot the moments where the truth was hiding in plain sight. It's the kind of film where a casual glance or a hesitated response suddenly carries so much more meaning the second time around. That's the mark of a film that truly engages, not just during its runtime, but long after. So, does Regretting You emotionally resonate? Absolutely. It doesn't just resonate, it reverberates. It digs into the parts of your soul that connect with loss, love, anger, and healing, and it doesn't let go. Whether you find yourself sobbing, laughing through your tears, or sitting in stunned silence, it's a film that demands to be felt.
And you will feel it.
Every word, every look, every choice. Regretting You walks into a crowded room of emotionally driven mother-daughter dramas and somehow manages to hold its own without screaming for attention. Compared to other teen meets adult grief films, think Lady Bird, The Fault in Our Stars, or even Pieces of a Woman, this one takes a slightly different route. It doesn't just focus on a teenager figuring herself out or an adult grappling with loss. Instead, it sits in the tense, layered space between both perspectives. You're not just watching Clara grieve her father and stumble into first love. You're also watching Morgan re-examine her marriage, her motherhood, and her entire identity as a woman who's been silently suffocating under expectations. That duality sets it apart from the typical coming-of-age story or domestic tragedy. Compared to other emotionally heavy dramas, Regretting You doesn't weaponize sadness. Yes, there are heartbreaking moments, but they're grounded. They're not manufactured melodrama. They feel earned, slow-burning, and honest. If Manchester by the Sea made you feel like you were drowning in grief with no rescue in sight, Regretting You throws you a life jacket at just the right moment. It's emotionally potent, but there's always a thread of hope, a pulse of warmth. It avoids becoming misery porn, which is where many other films in this space tend to lose their audience. If you line it up against the romantic YA adaptations like To All the Boys I've Loved Before or Everything, Regretting You takes a more serious and grounded approach to teenage romance. The love story between Clara and Miller doesn't have the sugar-glazed, fairy tale coating of a Netflix rom-com. It's sweet, yes, but it's also messy, uncertain, and at times painfully awkward in a way that feels very real. That makes their relationship more relatable, and the stakes, especially considering the family trauma, feel higher. Clara doesn't just want a boyfriend. She wants stability, trust, someone who isn't keeping secrets. It's romantic, sure, but it's also deeply rooted in emotional necessity, not fantasy. Now, when we talk about the film's tone and emotional DNA, comparisons to Hallmark dramas or Lifetime films might sneak in. But Regretting You doesn't go for the easy melodrama those TV movies live on. It doesn't wrap things up with a glittery bow or toss in a villain just to crank up the conflict. It trusts its audience to sit with complicated feelings, to question characters' choices, and to understand that sometimes there isn't a clear hero or villain in a family dynamic. That nuance is where it separates itself from formulaic storytelling. And in terms of adaptation, from Colleen Hoover's novel, it's actually more restrained than many other book-to-screen transitions. It avoids over-explaining, doesn't force inner monologues into voiceovers, and lets silences do the emotional heavy lifting. Compared to adaptations like The Last Song or After, which often lean into melodrama and cliché to capture young audiences, Regretting You respects the intelligence and emotional depth of both its characters and its viewers. It doesn't hold your hand. It simply lays the pieces out and lets you feel your way through them. From a director's filmography perspective, if you compare this to previous emotionally charged character dramas they've helmed, this film is more intimate, more inward-facing. There's a rawness to it that feels less polished but more personal. It doesn't rely on big scenes or dramatic climaxes to make its impact. Instead, it quietly builds an emotional volcano beneath the surface and then lets it erupt in glances, arguments, and heart-stopping silences. So does it follow a familiar formula? Sure. It plays within the sandbox of family drama, grief, and healing. But it builds a more honest castle out of those sand grains. It doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It just rolls it through more textured, emotionally resonant terrain. In a genre that often gets either too sentimental or too detached, Regretting You finds its power in doing something deceptively simple, telling the truth about complicated love. And not every film in its genre can say the same. In Regretting You, symbolism isn't just decorative, it's the emotional glue holding the entire story together. The film uses recurring motifs and subtle metaphors not to overcomplicate things, but to quietly nudge you deeper into the emotional current running underneath each scene. At the center of it all is the image of a fractured mirror, a powerful metaphor echoed in everything from Morgan and Clara's broken communication to the literal car crash that kickstarts the story's unraveling. That crash doesn't just break metal, it shatters the carefully maintained illusions within their family, and from that point forward, everyone is left staring at a version of themselves they don't quite recognize. Another quiet yet poignant symbol is Morgan's journal, which functions as both a bridge and a wall. At first, it's just a prop, a place for Morgan to vent. But as the story unfolds, it becomes a metaphor for all the things left unsaid between her and Clara. It's where the truth lives, but also where misunderstanding brews. The journal represents generational memory, emotional inheritance, and the fear of passing on one's worst mistakes. It isn't just a book, it's a ticking emotional time bomb. When Clara eventually discovers what's inside, the explosion isn't visual, but it's seismic in terms of character development. Clara's photography is another visual thread that subtly weaves through the film. Her camera acts like a shield and a filter. She uses it to freeze moments she can control, unlike her spiraling reality. It's a metaphor for her need to hold on, to understand, and to observe from a safe distance before she's ready to participate in life again. Every time Clara lifts that camera, she's trying to reframe her world, literally and figuratively. It's also no accident that key turning points in her emotional arc are often marked by whether she's holding the camera or not. When she lets it go, she's finally choosing to live instead of just document. Letters and texts, especially those unsent or discovered posthumously, act as symbolic ghosts. They haunt the characters not with fear, but with longing and regret. These pieces of digital or written communication become echoes of love, betrayal, and truth. They're not just plot devices, they're modern metaphors for how we store emotion and meaning in silence, often never delivered, never read, yet still life-changing. The most delicate and emotionally charged metaphor, though, lies in the use of doors. Closed doors, locked doors, doors left ajar, they all represent emotional distance. There's that unforgettable scene where Morgan stands on one side of Clara's door, talking to her daughter, who refuses to open it. It's a simple visual, but it lands like a gut punch because it isn't just about that one moment. It encapsulates their entire relationship. Two people aching to connect, separated by hurt, misunderstanding, and unspoken truth. When a door finally opens between them near the end, it says more than any dialogue ever could. Even color choices carry symbolic weight. The film transitions from colder, washed-out hues to warmer tones as the characters begin to thaw emotionally and inch toward reconciliation. It's not overly stylized, but it's intentional. The warmth doesn't just signal a visual shift, it reflects emotional healing. The use of light is another subtle metaphor. Darkness isn't villainized, but moments of literal illumination, sunlight through windows, warm lamp glow during heart-to-hearts, signal safety, vulnerability, and progress. Ultimately, Regretting You doesn't beat you over the head with its symbolism. It trusts you to notice, to feel the weight of its metaphors without being told they're there. Whether it's a mirror, a camera, a letter, or just a half-open door, every object and gesture is layered with emotional resonance. It's the kind of storytelling that doesn't just show you pain, love, or forgiveness. It makes you feel them in the spaces between words, in the pauses between scenes, and in the quietest visual details. That's where its metaphors truly shine, not loudly, but deeply. Regretting You may not be part of a franchise or based on a specific historical event, but its contextual roots run deep in the fabric of modern family drama and contemporary coming-of-age tales. In a cinematic landscape filled with noisy franchises, superhero epics, and dystopian sagas, this film sneaks in as a quiet but potent counterpoint. It's the kind of story that doesn't rely on a sequel or prequel to matter. It's built on emotional legacy, not cinematic continuity. Still, even without official chapters before or after, Regretting You feels like it belongs in an unofficial anthology of emotionally charged, intergenerational dramas, sitting comfortably beside films like Lady Bird, The Spectacular Now, or The Fault in Our Stars. It channels the same spirit of aching honesty, generational misunderstanding, and bittersweet growth. But what's fascinating is how Regretting You builds its own internal franchise of emotional threads, mothers and daughters at war with each other, grief that both divides and heals, and secrets that don't just stay buried, but echo across time. Even though it's a standalone film, the emotional architecture feels so layered and familiar that it might as well be a spiritual sequel to 100 other stories about loss, love, and letting go. It doesn't just exist in isolation. It taps into a shared emotional memory that many viewers bring with them. It borrows from the cultural tapestry of late-night mother-daughter fights, first heartbreaks, and the painful realization that parents are fallible. In that sense, the film isn't just a one-off story. It's a continuation of a long, unspoken narrative so many families are already living. There's also a quiet nod to the history of women's stories in cinema. For decades, films centered on female emotional landscapes were often relegated to the tearjerker shelf, dismissed as melodrama. Regretting You flips that old narrative on its head. It doesn't apologize for its emotional intensity. It embraces it. It belongs to a growing lineage of films that take female pain, resilience, and complexity seriously. It respects the inner lives of its characters the same way prestige historical dramas treat kings and generals. In doing so, it reclaims emotional storytelling as its own kind of historical document, not the history of nations, but the history of hearts. Even stylistically, it draws from a tradition. The restrained tone, the textured performances, the emotionally intelligent writing, they all trace back to films that cared more about emotional realism than spectacle. There's a reason the story feels timeless despite being set in the now. It doesn't chase trends. Instead, it leans into emotional truth, which never goes out of style. So no, Regretting You isn't part of a blockbuster franchise or based on a pivotal historical event, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful in a larger context. It's a story that draws power from emotional lineage rather than narrative continuation. It's not expanding a universe. It's exploring one internally, emotionally, generationally. And that might be even more impactful than any cinematic universe could hope to be. If you're wondering where and how to catch Regretting You, the upcoming Colleen Hoover adaptation, the journey starts at the movie theater. The film is set for a theatrical release in the United States on October 24, 2025, and will hit cinemas in Germany just a day earlier on October 23, 2025. This isn't the kind of quiet release that sneaks onto a streaming platform unnoticed. This one's aiming for a big screen moment, which makes sense given its emotionally charged story and the cinematic drama expected from Josh Boone's direction. Theaters are likely to offer the most immersive experience for this film. Given the emotionally heavy scenes, mother-daughter tension, and romantic plotlines that Hoover fans are familiar with, a darkened cinema with surround sound and zero distractions is probably the best way to let the story hit home. If you've read the novel, you know the moments that will pull at your heartstrings, and watching those unfold with a crowd can enhance the shared emotional ride. As of now, no official announcements have been made about streaming platforms or digital rental availability. However, if it follows the same path as other book-to-film adaptations in this tier, a digital release could land roughly 45 to 90 days after the theatrical run. That means by late 2025 or early 2026, you might be able to stream it from your couch, but that's speculation for now. So if you're counting the days, grab your calendar and mark October, because that's when the emotional fireworks begin, and the only guaranteed seat is the one you book in a theater.